Hello, everyone. Welcome to the best practices on communication during a remote internship. We are going to get started shortly in just a few minutes. If you could introduce yourself in the chat feature, say your name. If you are doing a remote internship and where that's at, feel free to share where you're tuning in from. One of the cool things about remote internships is that you can access them from everywhere. So we have students all around the world on Symba. Throughout the webinar, we'll also be checking the chat feature. So you can also use the Q&A as well to ask questions. So if you do ask questions in the chat, feel free to post them there. Okay, we already have one person participating. Feel free to share where you're tuning in from. Great, we have someone from Berkeley.
And it looks like those messages are going to all panelists. I'm not sure if attendees can see those. So you may want to select your message settings so all panelists and attendees can see.
That is great. Thanks so much for sharing that, Mitra.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. From Morocco. Imagine the time difference too. So thank you so much for joining us. Perfect. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We are very excited for all of you to join us. Right now is a critical time for remote internships, especially right now in the world. Many programs have shifted entirely remote. At Symba, we've always been a big sponsor and advocate for remote internships. In college, I was one of the very first remote interns with the U.S. Department of State. And my name is Ava. For those of you who don't know, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Symba. And we created Symba to create more accessibility and opportunities for students to intern from anywhere, all through the use of their laptop. I personally have done 6 remote internships, so happy to answer any questions that you have around communication or remote internships at large. Feel free to post them in the Q&A. We have a special guest today from the Hired Institute. We have Sydney Makita. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Love to pass the platform over to you just to share a little bit about yourself and before we dive on into the practices as well.
Alrighty, sounds good. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Ava and Symba team. It's really exciting that we're bringing everybody together as it relates to remote internships and all that good stuff. So I'm the founder of Hired Institute. By profession, I am a career strategist and coach. So I help people land their dream jobs. But I've also been on the side of the hiring side. I run my own company, and I'm also a hiring manager for a digital marketing firm. So I've kind of been on the side of working with the remote team as well from the employer's perspective. So I kind of see both sides, which is exciting. And I'm so excited to be here with you all today as we discuss like effective communication strategies during a remote internship. One of the most important things, right, is being able to communicate effectively when you are working remote. So through this webinar, through the session that we have today, we're going to give you a few tips that can actually help you with your communication in a remote internship. And I know that these practices can also help you if you one day transition into a full-time job and it's remote. This is definitely going to help as well. So if you are ready to get started, give me a yes in the chat so that I can see that we're all on the same page, that we're ready for this webinar, that we're attentive, that we're here. Give me a yes in the chat. Yes from Sebastian, yes from Ishika. Awesome. Ikram says yes. Leonard says yes. Paula says yes. Okay, we are good to go. So I'm going to share a few tips, and I really want you to take notes wherever you are. It's going to be really helpful. And I know as you take notes, it's going to help to further ingrain it in your mind. Okay, so some effective communication tips and strategies when working remotely. Number one is the initial questions that you have to ask when you are just getting started. Okay, so these are some crucial questions that you want to be thinking about and asking your employer if you don't know the answer to these, to actually kickstart off your communication in a good and effective way. So number one is, who is my main point of contact? So you want to know if you have an issue or if you have a question, who is that go-to person that you're going to be, attached to. So make sure that you know who that point of contact is and who that person is so that you can facilitate that easy communication. Number two, what is our main form of communication? Will you be communicating just through email? Is it through Slack or Zoom or a combination of all of these? You want to know, right, and be clear on what forms and methods of communication will we be using. Is it email for certain instances? Is it text messages for others? Be very clear and make sure that you ask these questions when you're just getting started so that you are clear on what is that best form of communication, depending on the situation as well. Okay, so number one, who is my main point of contact? Number two, what is our main form of communication? Number three, what are my employer's communication expectations? This is a big one. Does your employer want you to check in daily? Is it weekly? Maybe it's through virtual meetings on a monthly basis. Knowing what your employer's communication expectations are very important so that you can adhere to that, right? So that you are clear on exactly what that is, and so that there's no miscommunication or anything like that. And if they don't tell you that up front, be sure to ask, like, what does your supervisor or manager prefer? For example, with me and my team, I like daily check-ins. So in the morning, my team will let me know, okay, what they're working on for the day, and maybe we do like a once a week, once-off check-in as well. And that's how I prefer, to be communicated with. Whereas some managers, maybe it's just a once a week or once a month, but you want to be clear on exactly what those communication expectations are as it relates to your manager, supervisor, etc., because it varies, right, across industries and what your manager or supervisor prefers. So let's recap those three initial questions that you want to ask when you're getting started. Number one, who is your main point of contact? Number two, what is your main form of communication? And then number three, what are your employer's communication expectations? Is everybody with me? Give me a yes in the chat if we are on the same page. So those are just the first few questions that you want to ask when you are getting started. Okay, so this is not even, we haven't even delved into the internship yet. This is what you want to ask right off the bat so that you are clear on all the forms of communication. Okay, so I'm getting yeses in the chat. Awesome, we're all together. Next, the next point as it relates to communicating effectively when working remotely is to communicate clearly, openly, and frequently. I'll say that again. You want to communicate clearly, openly, and frequently. Over communicate and don't make assumptions. It is very easy when you are working remotely, right? If you maybe send somebody an email or you send them a Slack message, sometimes it's easy for things to get misconstrued or miscommunicated. So you want to over communicate as much as possible, especially when working remotely. Don't make assumptions. Don't assume that if somebody sends a message in a certain way that they were implying it maybe being rude or mean. You really don't know the context. So make sure that you put things in context. Don't make assumptions, but make sure that you're communicating clearly, openly, and frequently. Those three: clearly, openly, and frequently. Take into consideration that the person on the other side of your communication, as I mentioned, they might take it in the wrong way, right? Or they may not know the context that you are giving that. Maybe it's an email or a text message or anything like that. So being very clear and very transparent about what you are communicating is really key to effective communication. And likewise, on the receiving end, don't make assumptions when somebody's sending you an email or a Slack. Don't make assumptions. If something is unclear, ask. That is a big one. Make sure that you ask. Ask for clarification. Ask if you need help, especially that, right? Don't just let, if something comes up and you're uncertain or unsure of how to do it, don't just leave it at that. Make sure that you ask. Ask questions. Ask for clarification. If somebody has sent you an email and you weren't really sure what they meant by that, simply ask. Ask rather than assume, okay? That's a really big one. So another thing as it relates to communicating clearly, openly, and frequently is to ask for feedback, right? We're on this topic of asking and communicating effectively. So one thing that you want to do throughout your internship is to regularly seek feedback, right? some managers, employers will just readily give you feedback as you produce, as you deliver work, as you deliver results. But others sometimes won't. Sometimes you'll just be going through the motions and you're forgetting to ask for feedback. So make this a point that as you are developing within your internship, as you are producing and generating results, that you are asking for feedback regularly. I remember my first internship at the International Finance Corporation with the World Bank. And I remember making it a point to communicate often, but also to ask for feedback. So whenever I would deliver a report or I would submit an assignment, I made sure to ask. I said, you know, attached to the report as you requested, please give me feedback on my work so that I can improve. Or if there's any areas that I could fix, please provide feedback. Now, number one, not only does that show that you are open to receiving feedback, it also shows that you are hungry to learn and grow. Sometimes it may be difficult to receive feedback, but communicating in that way, it's going to help you actually progress within your role and within that internship. Okay, so not only are you going to ask for clarification when things are uncertain, ask as much as you can, but then secondly, ask for feedback so that you can continuously progress within your role. The next point when it comes to communicating openly, clearly, and frequently is to follow up when you don't hear back. Okay, so if you perhaps have sent your manager or supervisor an email and they haven't gotten back to you, don't assume, remember we spoke about don't make assumptions, don't assume that they maybe perhaps ignored you or anything like that. Sometimes people get busy, sometimes emails or messages fall through the cracks. If you don't get a response, don't be afraid to follow up. Follow up via message or an email, just saying, you know, as you kind of copy that email that you did before or forward it, and you say, hey, I was not sure if you noticed this, but I wanted to resend it so that it's at the top of your email or top of your inbox. Simple things like that show that you are, number one, very attentive. Number two, it shows that you're cognizant of this manager or supervisor's time, that they may be really busy, but you're just, you know, being very, very cognizant of these things. And it really helps to facilitate effective communication. So don't only seek feedback, but also follow up. If something hasn't, or even another thing is, if you've asked a manager for something and they haven't given it back to you, or you've been asking for something that you need to complete your work and they haven't given it to you, don't assume that they don't want to help you or that they're being difficult. Always ask, follow up. You know, be understanding in that. I understand that you're really busy or that this may have fallen through the cracks, but I just wanted to follow up with you on XYZ. Okay, you want to communicate clearly, openly, and frequently. And then lastly, on this point is, as I mentioned earlier, you want to clarify, right? You don't want to make assumptions. Clarify if there's something that you don't understand. Clarify and summarize to avoid misinterpretation. So for example, you receive an email from a colleague or a manager, and you're not really sure what they mean within their email. What you're going to do is you're going to clarify and summarize. So you could say something like, from what you mentioned, I'm gathering that you mean XYZ. So you are summarizing what they said, and then you actually are trying to clarify, and when they respond, they'll provide further information. So rather than assume, clarify and summarize to avoid misinterpretation. So all of this falls under communicating clearly, openly, and frequently. Remember, over-communicate. Over-communication is a good thing if you don't want to make assumptions. So ask as much as possible. If everybody's with me, give me a yes in the chat. That was a lot of information. We have one more point to go through, but before we move forward, let me know that you are with me. I got a yes from Saba, from Gary, from Asma. I got from Ishika, yes, from Trinity. Awesome. Okay, so we're on the same page. Last point when it comes to effective communication. Be very, very mindful of your virtual body language. Be mindful of your virtual body language. This is a big one. So very often, of course, if you are working remotely, you'll get onto Zoom calls, video calls, Google Hangouts, whatever that is. Be very mindful of how you communicate virtually. There's a statistic that says psychologists today state that 55% of communication is body language. 55% is body language. 38% is the tone of voice, and 7% is the actual words spoken. So when you are on a Zoom call, when you are on a video call, your body language, your tone of voice are so key. Because it's one thing for me to like show up to this webinar like this and kind of disinterested and slouching and not really interested. And it's another thing for me to sit up and look at the camera and be engaged and excited about interacting with my team or having this meeting. We can see the stark differences, right? So be very, very cognizant that when you're hopping on a Zoom call or a video virtual call, that you are just cognizant and mindful of your body language, because it says so much. Your body language says so much. It says, you're not only talking about, right, your posture and your hand gestures and how you communicate, but it's saying a lot about how you value people's time just by how you show up, okay? So your posture is key. Sit up, look straight at the camera, and be engaged every time you get onto a Zoom meeting or Google Hangouts, any kind of video call. Be cognizant and mindful of your posture, because your virtual body language is a method or a form of communication as well. Okay, so let us recap those 3 points that we went through, right, as it relates to effective communication when working remotely. Number one, be cognizant of the initial questions that you ask when you are starting out. Who is your main point of contact? What is your main form of communication? Is it email? Is it Slack? Is it a combination? And then what are your employer's communication expectations? How often do they want you to be in communication? Is it just at the end of an assignment? Is it throughout? Do they want daily, weekly check-ins? Be mindful and cognizant of that. Number two, communicate clearly, openly, and frequently. Over communicate and don't make assumptions. Ask as much as possible. Ask for verification, to clarify, ask for feedback. There is really no harm in asking. No such thing as a stupid question either. And your employer will value that, because they value how much you want to gain more insights, how much you want to be more clear, how much you don't want to assume, right? It says a lot. Somebody that communicates effectively, openly, and honestly says a lot. And of course, context is key, right? Don't make assumptions, where either when you're receiving communication or when you are giving it, be mindful that context is key. And then lastly, be mindful of your virtual body language. Very, very important with that one. All right, over to you, Ava.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I wish I had known this before I started all my virtual internships. I think it was, especially at the time, definitely learning a lot about how do we interact remotely. Something that I think when I started off as an intern, I was always very nervous to follow up. If I had emailed my manager, I didn't want to bug them, or if I was missing something and they told me they would get it, sometimes I said, maybe I'll give them 2 more days or 3 more days. So do you have advice for us on following up and what is a good appropriate cadence? If we're not getting correspondence from our manager, do we feel like it's 24 hours is a good amount of time? How do you encourage interns to follow up?
That's a really good question. One of the things that I would do, say if I was submitting an assignment and I wanted feedback, or I was waiting on something to be sent to me. And this is what I would do also in this situation. 48 hours generally, but it also depends, right? It depends. How soon do you need this to be able to continue with your work? It depends kind of question. But following up it's really not a bad thing. It's a good thing. When you're following up, but the method in which you're doing it says a lot. So number one, stating that you're cognizant that they may be busy says a lot, right? So number one, saying, hi there, I'm going to name her, hi there, Ava. I just wanted to know, following up on my previous communication, I know that you might be really busy at this time, but I just wanted to send you this so that it's at the top of your email, and it's a quick reminder. So just showing that you're cognizant that they're busy, but it's also showing that, okay, I need this. And you said you were going to follow up with me. So sometimes it just slips people's minds, right? Because people get caught up in the work that they have to get done. But just be mindful of timelines. So, how soon do you need that information so that you can carry on with your work? If not, generally 48 hours is a good go-to.
Great. Thank you so much for that advice. I'm so grateful for your support, and Cindy does amazing blog posts and research too on this content. So I do highly encourage you to check out Hired Institute. We're also going to open up to Q&A afterwards. So please make sure that you are posting in the chat. This is your time to ask us questions about remote internships and best practices. We really want to help you shine this summer through your remote experience. Now I'm excited to also walk you through kind of some of the experience and research that we've done at Symba. We've helped design over 5,000 remote internship experiences to date. And we also have Mitra here from our team who runs partnerships, universities, and has been sending out many of the weekly assemblies that I know that you receive from the Symba team. So she will guide us through some scenario prompts of how you can respond in certain situations. And I'm going to share some of my best practices from the learnings I've had over the course of my internships. So bear with me, I'm gonna share my screen. Perfect. So I want you all to take a moment and just imagine your dream internship. I know there are a diversity of interns on this call from different backgrounds. So if you have a piece of paper open in your mind, just imagine what it looks like. Who is your manager? How large is your team? And for now, imagine that it is remote so that you are, in a beautiful office-based setting that you've designed and curated for yourself and what those hours look like. So just think about what is that company that you want to be working for. And now jot down what the work culture is. So one thing we've noticed is whether you're an engineer or you're working on a marketing team at a startup, the culture could be very different, meaning that the language of communication is also very different. So for example, if you are at a startup with a lot of peers who are maybe around, only a few years older than you, the language could be very informal and very fun. Or if you're at a professional, maybe a consulting firm or a formal law firm, that language might be very different and very, very professional. They might not even use Slack, or it might be inappropriate to use emojis. So that's why I encourage you just to think about, what does that work culture look like? And next, this is a little bit different, and you might have not done this before because as interns starting out in the workforce, we're creating our brand of how we want to be perceived in the workforce. This might be the first time you're ever working in a workplace environment. So what I like to say is, imagine that you leave the room or someone asks you, a teammate asks how to describe you. So are you fun? Are you creative? Are you professional? Are you a team player? Are you responsive? So write down 3 adjectives that you would love to be tied to you. It could be being very professional. It could be being very organized, or it could be being very out of the box and creative. We all are different, and it's important to acknowledge that we all have our own brand and who we want to be in the workforce. So I encourage you to make sure that you weave this in within all of your communication. If you're fun, be fun on Slack. Really make sure that you're being true to who you are. And so this should not change if you are moving to a remote workforce. So there are ways to capture this, and I'll give you some tidbits and advice of how to do that. So the first one, I know Cindy alluded to this already, but make sure you smile. Make sure that you are engaged and present. And I think this goes for being remote, being in person, even outside the workforce. Anything you do, really show up. So with video calls, if team members are showing up with video on, make sure you do the same. And you can always ask them in advance, do you show up with videos? How can I be engaged? Even on, there are very, unique ways that you can set up your workplace settings. So if you wanted to stand up during your calls, because that might keep you awake. Whenever I have a very formal presentation or a very important meeting, I'll set up my laptop so that I'm standing up so that I'm even more alert than being, slunched down or slopped over. So make sure that you do that, and make sure you smile, because, if you're, and be happy to be on that call, because it can be exhausting to be on the screen all day. So you want to be positive and memorable there. The next tip I have to share is using descriptive language in your communication. So this could be in your emails, in your Slack. Think thoughtfully about the word choice that you're using, because people, they're taking time to read your correspondence. So you don't want to also, write long messages. You want to be short and concise, but then also use word choice that is very descriptive and also creative, because it's fun to read something that is eloquently written. and can also bring on a sense of voice and personality within your writing. So, I encourage you to have in the intro of your email, hope you had a nice weekend, closures and statements that are nice and positive. You can even have a signature at the bottom of your signature that shares a little bit about something that you're excited about or about your studies and your career. So anything you can do to keep description of yourself and branding, I highly recommend. The third one, definitely take advantage of fun tools. Be mindful of what we described earlier as far as your workplace and the culture that you have there. So if it's a fun environment that you can use emojis, use emojis. If it's an environment where you can also use reactions on Zoom. So Zoom has a clap feature that you can use. It has a thumbs up feature that you can use because you don't always need to be talking on a call in order to be part of the conversation. And it's important because you can't have everybody talking at once. So take advantage of those tools, take advantage of the chat feature of Q&A just to show that you're being present on the call. There's a really cool blog post that I can share afterwards, but it's a post of all the fun resources you can use on Slack that are creative. You can use GIFs or GIFs. I'm not sure how you formally say that yet. I know there has been some debate there, but be fun. It's great to be memorable. If you can make someone laugh while you're working remotely, I think that it's such a nice thing to do. Think about how you can be present and engaged, and then also make your remote experience fun. It's great for you, also peer-to-peer with your other remote interns, and then also with your managers. And then the fourth one, as cliche as it is, be you. Be very personable. If you are a professional person and you like to be extremely organized, be that person. I'm not really good at jokes, as I've been told. So I don't really try to make as many jokes in the workforce because that's not who I am. Some people are sarcastic. Be careful with sarcasm in the workforce because people like myself who don't know how to read it can also struggle. So just be yourself, be comfortable, and that will shine because people will remember you and they'll have that inclination towards your personality. So a remote internship is what you make it, and you can be very creative and take advantage of the resources here. On Symba's blog, we'll be posting fun things and tools you can use to improve the experience. But now I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit into something that is a little bit more scenario driven and case study driven that I think is a great way of learning. So I'm going to pass it on over to Mitra, who has great experience running workshops here. Thank you so much, Mitra.
Yeah, thank you, Ava. Thank you, Cindy. So I'll be alluding to some of the things that both Ava and Cindy spoke on earlier. So we'll start with the first scenario here. So you've recently started your internship program. You've met with your manager on Zoom prior to the start date, and together you've determined your duties, your responsibilities, as well as your working hours. However, your manager has messaged you with a request over the weekend, and you haven't established best practices about communication outside of working hours. So as a diligent intern you're eager and you respond to that question, but you feel uneasy about working beyond your decided hours. So how do you gain clarification about when you're expected to respond to these messages so you don't feel uncomfortable about having to respond on a Saturday or when you're really supposed to be taking your time off? Working boundaries when you're working remotely are really important so that you have a sense of space for yourself as well as space for your professional life. So using the skills that both Ava and Cindy alluded to, you want to send your response whenever you're comfortable to send it. Either that's going to be immediately when you see it for that first time it's outside of working hours or when you're working again. And with that response, briefly ask your manager what the best practice is. Are you going to be responding purely when you're working? Are you going to develop some sort of practice where you respond if there's an urgent message? How do you want to notify the urgency of that message? So if you get a message through Slack, is that a priority to respond to versus an email message? So in a brief way, maybe bullet pointed, you can ask your manager, what are some other signals that you can apply and that they can apply in order for you to be clear on the urgency of that response? I'm going to pass it over to Alvin. So, do you have any points to add to this scenario as well?
Yes, I think this is a really good scenario. Generally, just like you said, Mita, it's like what the manager wants, right? So if you have established those clear lines of communication in the beginning, you'd know, right, as I mentioned that, okay, if a message comes to Slack, for example, maybe it's not as urgent, but if it's a text message, maybe it's more urgent, just depending on what you have established as those clear lines of communication. But it's always good to establish it from the start. I remember in one of my first jobs coming out of college, so it wasn't necessarily an internship, but kind of similar. My first role, I was right out of college. I remember it was a similar situation. My manager had asked me a question over the weekend. I didn't respond. I just didn't feel like we had that, that clear line of communication that I had to, respond on weekends. And I got in on Monday and I just had a simple, conversation with her stating that I wasn't sure, we hadn't discussed this before. So I rather didn't respond because I wasn't aware that I needed to respond on weekends. But just having that clear line of communication, I think avoids a lot of the ambiguity, or it avoids the uncertainty when you aren't sure if you should respond or not. So definitely have those conversations. I think early on is best. And if you can be proactive about having the conversation, you'll already know how to respond when the situation does arise.
Absolutely.
I think this is such a great scenario because especially with remote work, it's hard to like have those clear boundaries between working hours. Because like when you're an intern in the office, you leave the office and you're like, I'm done. I don't have to respond to emails. Sometimes you actually can't respond to emails because you don't have the laptop. But here in this scenario, something to do, I know myself, I would totally respond to. And I think a lot of people doing interns, especially the ones that are on this call today, you're go-getters. So you would be the ones to also respond. But I think what you can do is, have a follow-up conversation where you also do share, like, just wanted to confirm that, I won't be responsible for responding to emails on the weekend. I have set up notifications, so I'm not notified of emails on the weekend. If we do want to adjust my hours, I would be happy to have a conversation there, but just want to make sure that I'm clear on when to respond. In the future, if I do receive something on a Saturday, would you like me to hold off and wait until Monday, or how should we proceed? And that way the manager knows, like, okay, you have your notifications off, because as a manager myself, managing a team, sometimes I think of projects and tasks, I want to email them, but that doesn't mean I want my team members to work on the project on that Saturday. So, you can just clarify with them, like, I understand that you sent this to me, but would you like me to begin working on it on Monday? So just having that clarity there would be important and valuable.
Yeah. And I think one more thing I'd like to add to that, you mentioned kind of this discomfort that you get when you're unsure and there's ambiguity about when you're supposed to communicate if that hasn't been established. So listen to that feeling that you get. If you're not sure about something, that's a great opportunity to do what Cindy's saying and ask for clarification. Great, thank you for your points, that's wonderful. Okay. So we'll move on to scenario 2. So in this situation, you're running late for an important Friday stand-up meeting, and the entire company attends this meeting on Zoom. So everyone is expecting you to present your research memo, and you are on the agenda to speak first. What do you do? This is a great example of exercising those communication practices that we talked about. So depending on what you've established at the start, maybe you message through text, and that's your most urgent line of communication to let your manager know you're running late, you apologize, and get there as soon as you can and get started. That way your manager knows, okay, we can shuffle this agenda. Maybe someone else can speak first since you're not going to make it. So exercise what you've established in the beginning, either it's text, Slack, maybe email is your most urgent form of communication. I would generally assume chat features are going to be your most urgent method. Yeah, any other points, Ava and Cindy? No,
I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. And it's just understanding that you're human. People are human, so people are generally understanding. So just don't be afraid to communicate, but especially do be proactive with your communication. But it's also not the end of the world when something like this happens, right? It's human. You're human, so it's okay. Of course, you try to avoid being late, of course. But when things like this happen, just being proactive about communicating is key. And just like you said, Mita, what is the most urgent or what is the best way that I can communicate this most urgent situation? So is it through text message? Is it through Slack? Is it through email? You know, what is the way that it's going to get, the information is going to get to the person that needs it the quickest, because it's obviously urgent? Is it like you quickly, a phone call to your manager or boss, like, hi, I'm running late. I don't usually call, but, you know, I just wanted to let you know. So find what is the easiest way to communicate something that's urgent.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that all of those points are so valuable and important. One thing to also know, you can ask them in advance, like, if I'm running late to something, how should I let you know? And running late doesn't even mean just sleeping in. Sometimes your computer's frozen and you actually can't get onto the Zoom link. So there's a whole host of reasons why you could be running late. Your Wi-Fi could be out. So making sure that you have a good relationship with them is important. Also, you know, if you are running late afterwards, do check in with your manager and do say, you know, I'm so sorry. This is what happened. Didn't mean for it to happen. It won't happen again. But I appreciate you being so understanding of it and moving around the schedule the way you did. So making sure, you know, if you ever, you know, slip up, follow up afterwards, just so you can kind of, you know, leave loose ends and you show that, you know, you do care that this happened and you don't want it to happen again. And then the second point I would also make is, when you are late and you do show up, it's important that you also hold that sense of poise. So don't jump on in into the center of the meeting and apologize profusely for being late, you know, because they're in the middle of a discussion and the meeting has already started. So if you do show up late, it's important that you show up on mute. And if you wanted to Slack your manager, or you can message them directly on Zoom privately, say, apologize that I am late. Where should I jump in? Please let me know, rather than disrupting the whole order. Because, you know, it's one thing to be late, but another thing to be like, I'm late, stop the show for me. So make sure that you're poised in that sense as well. That's what I'd add.
Those are some great points. And that leads us on to our third scenario about following up. So in this situation, your work colleague did something nice for you and to help you on a project. So with their help, you're able to meet the deadline and receive great feedback from your manager. So how do you say thank you remotely? You can't just walk over to their desk and talk to them and appreciate their assistance. So there's a lot of ways you can do this, and you can get really creative with this. I mean, for it to be simple, you can send them a thoughtful email and acknowledge their effort, and just point out how what their act was impacted your success. So just a brief email like that would be lovely. But beyond that, so if someone does something really exceptional for you, you can go above and beyond, maybe even send them a thank you note. There's a lot of different ways that you can exercise this and get creative with your appreciation for your colleagues. And it's really welcomed by your teammates as well. When you don't get to see your teammates in person and have a lot of in-person interaction, when you have some sort of thoughtful human moment like that, I think it really says a lot about your character and how you care for your team and how you value and see the way they work with you. So Ava, Cindy, anything else to add with that one?
For me, I would definitely add in that anytime you can say thank you, even it doesn't have to be a private thank you. You can also say kudos to so-and-so for helping me on this project on a Slack channel. You can also say it in a meeting out loud to others, because I think when you show gratitude towards other team members remotely, other team members are watching, and it shows how you are a collaborative team member. So you can also make sure that the thank you is out loud. You know, as Mitra mentioned, an email. You can also do a virtual card. You can send a gift card, a coffee card in the mail, or virtually also through email. But just showing a sense of appreciation for anytime someone does help you remotely is really, really important. It brings the team closer together. And then you also have someone that you can lean on for support as you're working throughout your internship experience.
Yes, that's a really great point, Ava. I think that those public shout outs are really valuable as well, because it encourages that dynamic and culture for your entire team and community. And that always motivates people to keep working, huh?
Definitely, yeah. Don't feel afraid to reach out to others on the team for support. Like, everyone at your company is there to support you, not just your intern manager. So definitely use that as a platform to learn from others and meet other intern managers. You know, this is a great opportunity for you to learn and grow as well.
Fantastic.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for guiding us through that, Mitra. I think that these scenarios are a great way to learn, and great examples. Sometimes it's so much better to apply things to the real world. With that, we are excited to now pass it on over to Q&A. So feel free to post any questions that you have in the chat. Right here we have a Q&A. I'm going to answer the first question we have from Sebastian. How can I apply to internships? Is it just for students or also for recent grads? For Symba, it's for all. Everyone can apply all around the world, and you can apply directly on Symba's website. And we also have the Symba Slate that gathers a range of resources and all paid opportunities for students. Cindy, I don't know if you have any tidbits or advice for students that are applying for remote internships and how they can be competitive for remote opportunities.
Could you repeat your question, Heather?
Yes, I was asking if you have any advice for students who are applying for remote internships and how they can stand out as a remote intern.
Definitely. Well, through the application process, you most definitely want to tailor your resume to fit the job description. I think too many people have one standard resume, and you could be the most amazing candidate for the job, but if you're not effectively tailoring your resume to fit what the company is looking for, you're definitely putting yourself at a disadvantage, because even just as a hiring manager, they're skimming through resumes, right? Not even going through the applicant tracking system. They're skimming through resumes to see how closely a candidate fits what they're looking for. And just by simply tailoring your resume, you are going to stand out from a lot of candidates that don't take the time to do it. So just being intentional about showing that you are a good fit for that position by tailoring your resume, by creating a cover letter that actually speaks on how you're a great cultural fit for a company. So your resume is, it's going to speak on your skills and experience, and things like that, and how eager you are, but your cover letter is going to speak a lot about how you fit culturally with the company. So is it something that you resonate with their mission or their core values? Maybe you've used their products and services before. The cover letter is really more the human aspect of it, and showing that you're a great cultural fit for the company can definitely help you stand out in conjunction with tailoring your resume specifically for that role.
Thank you for that advice, Cindy. And Mitra, do you want to chime in and add anything on that note as far as applying to Symba or resources?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. When you're applying for internships through Symba, I just want to point out we do have the Symba Slate, which is a great opportunity to access internship opportunities. And we can link that in at the end of this conversation. They're also linked into the newsletters if you're receiving the newsletters. And so that's a platform to find internships that you can apply for.
Perfect, thank you. We have another question. What are the conditions to apply for a remote internship for engineering students? For Symba specifically, we do have a whole host of engineering challenges that we are happy to share more information afterwards. But we do encourage lots of students to apply. So we do have students who are actually coding and training to become engineering candidates for opportunities. So with internships, we encourage you to be able to test out something new and try something new in your career. So we don't generally have too many conditions for different positions and postings, and we understand this is early in your career. Great. So with that, well, happy to be a resource afterwards to answer questions that you may have, but would love to now pass it on over to Cindy to leave us with some final takeaways from today's conversation before we wrap things up.
Of course. Well, thank you all so much for joining. I think just like the common theme that we've been speaking about, not only in the beginning, but throughout the various scenarios that Mita was discussing, is really just to communicate openly, communicate often. Don't be afraid to ask as much as possible. Ask for feedback, ask for clarification. Make sure that you are very much aware of how your company and the team likes to communicate. So what are the various forms of communication, and how does your manager or supervisor or even your peers, how do they prefer to be communicated with? And just having those clear lines of communication and being proactive about your communication is really key to succeeding in a remote internship. So if you'd like to get in contact with me on the other side of this, you can visit hiredinstitute.com. We do host regular workshops and things of that nature to assist job seekers along their journeys as well. Thank you so much, Symba and this team, for having me. It was really awesome.
Thank you so much, Cindy, for joining us today and providing your resources. Mitra, I'd love to pass it on over to you.
Yeah, just thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to helping you find your paid remote internship and connecting you with professional opportunities. It's a really exciting journey, and these are really great ways to practice your skills and learn about different fields in the workforce and find your perfect fit for your career.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mitra, and thank you all for tuning in. As you know, the Symba team is here to support you for all things remote internship related. So we'll be following up. We'll have this on our YouTube channel for you to check out afterwards. We look forward to supporting your career and launching you into something really exciting. There will be more student series webinars this summer, so stay tuned. Thank you all again.